Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for getting up so early in order to hear my rantings. I really appreciate it. My name is Eva Galperin, and I'm here to tell you not to build the Torment Nexus. You may be wondering, who the hell is that? So, I'm the Director of Cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. How many of you here have heard of the Electronic Frontier Foundation? Excellent, like a reasonable number of you. For those of you who are not familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, we are a digital civil liberties organization that has been around since 1990, so we've been around for as long as the web, but not as long as the internet, and we know the difference. And also, we are a very successful t-shirt and sticker company. If you have been to a hacker conference, there's a very good chance you have seen EFF t-shirts and stickers. We are the closest thing DEF CON has to a religion. You can reach me at eva@eff.org, the easiest to remember email address in the history of time, or you can find me on Blue Sky or Mastodon, where I am on Hackaderm. Notice no Twitter/X, because that place sucks. You may be wondering, what is the Electronic Frontier Foundation? In addition to selling t-shirts and very cool stickers, we are a Voltron of 3 different kinds of employee. We have lawyers. We have an entire floor of angry attack lawyers, and what they do is they look for threats to digital civil liberties and they file lawsuits. We do impact litigation, and the whole point of impact litigation is you file a lawsuit that's not just going to help the people that are being represented in the lawsuit, but are going to have, impact beyond that we think is going to make a big difference for civil liberties. We also have lawyers and policy people all over the world, so not just in the United States, because we know that the internet is global and we have to pay attention to all of it. A weird and unpopular view in the United States right now. And we have people who live in all over Europe and in South America and Asia. We also have activists, because sometimes the way to deal with a problem, with a threat to digital civil liberties, is to get people out in the streets, or to sign petitions, or to contact your local representative and tell them, like, hey, don't vote for that, or hey, vote for this other thing, or this law is good, or this law is bad. We have a lot of that. And then finally, we have the team that I work on. We also have a team of very angry attack engineers. And our engineers are sort of divided into 2 parts. We have engineers that build tools that we think are useful for the entire internet. For example, if you have ever used certbot in order to have, SSL on your website with a single click for free, you're welcome. I'm not the person who does this, but I work next to them, and they're very cool. Or if you have ever installed the Privacy Badger browser extension in order to eat cookies, in order to make it more difficult to track your web browsing, also, you're welcome. Still not me. But definitely people I sit next to who are very cool. If you have ever used Ray Hunter, which is a tool that we have recently put out that helps you to detect the presence of sort of fake IMSI catchers, a thing that that allows you to catch the people's like text messages and stuff or fake cell towers, which we think governments are using in order to spy on people, say, at protests. You're welcome. Still not me. And so you may ask, Eva, but what do you do? What do you do? I yell a lot. But in the same way that our lawyers are attack lawyers and our engineers are attack engineers, I am an attack yeller. And I have spent many years working on a couple of different projects. Mostly I work on finding ways to protect vulnerable populations online. So activists, journalists, survivors of domestic abuse, LGBTQ populations, people who live in authoritarian regimes, people who live in rising authoritarian regimes. So I get to work from home now. So I'm very busy and I'm never going to run out of work, let me tell you. So you may have noticed that I have titled this talk, Do Not Build the Torment Nexus, in case you're wondering what my stance on the Torment Nexus is. But it occurs to me that not everybody is extremely online. So in case you are not extremely online, here is what I am referring to. This is a joke posted by Alex Bleckman, who used to write for The Onion. And he writes, sci-fi author, in my book I invented the Torment Nexus as a cautionary tale. Tech company. At long last, we have created the Torment Nexus from the classic sci-fi novel, Don't Create the Torment Nexus. And obviously, this is sort of, he is making a point about the tremendous illiteracy of the people who are running tech companies in Silicon Valley right now. Probably most notably, Peter Thiel, who named his vast surveillance company Palantir after the spying globes used by the bad guys. Also, that if you have ever made it to the end of the books or watched the third movie, didn't work. Anyway, I think you shouldn't do that. So what you should know about the Torment Nexus, what I think is the most important thing to know about Torment Nexuses, aside from making fun of Peter Thiel, which honestly, too easy, is that the Torment Nexus doesn't always come with a sign that says, hello, I am the Torment Nexus. Sometimes we build the Torment Nexus by accident. We build it by going with the flow and failing to think about the ways in which we are building, the things we're building will be used in the future. So we're going to talk a little bit about the world that AI has built and some of the ways in which the tools have caused damage, both on purpose and by accident, and in ways large and small. In this review of AI's sins, we're going to start very, very, very small. We're going to start with the sin of annoying me. And it starts with an email from EFF's press director, Josh. So my coworker sends me an email with a quote from me in some, like, newspaper, news blog, whatever. And it sounds very kind of like boring and neutral. And he says, so did you do this interview? Did you talk to this journalist? And I said, no, I have never heard of this news organization in all my life. And I didn't say that because let me tell you that quotes from me are punchier than that. Thank you very much. And I was a little bit worried. And I started getting messages like this from our press director once every few months. And obviously, I'm not special. So this started happening and was happening to other people at EFF. And basically, once every few weeks, our press director would find a Google search hit for a quote from somebody at EFF that we never said. Usually having to do with some sort of news article that is, on a content farm somewhere, often from a journalist who doesn't exist. And obviously this is all built by AI, and we started to find it really worrisome. And so Josh kind of wrote it up. Eventually, this progressed, and obviously, I'm talking in the past tense, but this absolutely still happens. Beyond misquoting me, which, as we know, is a shooting offense, I just wanted to bring up our most egregious example, which is a quote from in the Arabian Post, which doesn't exist. From privacy advocate Lin Win at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Lin Win remarked that the community monitoring tools are playing a civic role, though she warned of the potential for misinformation. So really, really boring, adenine quote. But the most important thing to know about Lin Win is that she also doesn't exist. There is no Lin Win at EFF. And in fact, even though Nguyen is an extremely common Vietnamese name, there is no Linh Nguyen sort of in our immediate kind of community of privacy and security activists. So this is a person who is completely made up. So I brought this up in a talk last year, and someone smugly told me, isn't having quotes misattributed to you a good thing? Having false information about yourself out there makes it harder to know what's real, and that protects your privacy, right? No, it doesn't. Because context matters. And in this context, I am an InfoSec professional whose job it is to talk to the press and give my employer's positions on relevant topics. It's important to my work that when people see a quote from me in a news story, they know it's me. And that the words coming out of my mouth are nuanced and accurate and reflect EFF's positions. So not only does this annoy me, but also it really undermines the work that I am doing, the work that my coworkers are doing, and the work that EFF does. All so that somebody can get some hits on, on their content farm. Oh, but the annoyance intensifies. So I don't know if you have heard this story, but there is a product called Grammarly, which does a sort of it reviews people's text and then provides edits. This is really commonly used in in writing, in journalism, by academics. Sometimes people at EFF run the Grammarly texts. We run our blog posts through Grammarly every once in a while, or more importantly, the kind of text that we post to SSD, which is our privacy and security guide. And the reason why we're particularly careful with our privacy and security guide is not because we're obsessed with having perfect grammar, because perfect grammar doesn't exist and all languages are malleable. It's because it's really important that we use simple and clear language for non-technical people whose first language we may not be speaking, and in order to make sure that we get, very complicated and nuanced ideas about digital privacy and security across. Sometimes when we write blog posts, we are writing blog posts to ordinary people, but sometimes we're writing them to policy wonks. And you sort of use policy wonk language, and things get very complicated, and you use a bunch of stuff that people don't understand. But this is the opposite of that. When we need to make sure that things are really clear and simple and difficult to misunderstand, then you use something like Grammarly. So Grammarly rolled out a new feature, and I use that term in quotes. It rolled out a feature called Expert Review that offers to give you suggestions inspired by experts. It uses AI to choose the experts. Then it uses AI to presumably trained on our writing, and I have worked for EFF for almost 19 years, so there's a very large pile of my writing out there. And it presumably is trained on our writing in order to extrapolate from it to give the writing advice it says we would give. I was mostly annoyed because I didn't think that the writing advice was any good. My coworker, Thorin, ran a blog post about Google Play Protect through Grammarly, and it came up with advice from me. He was really surprised, and he called me and he said, "Do you know Grammarly is giving me your editing advice?" I said, "I don't know, show me what it is." And as you can see here, it calls out a part of his blog post which says advanced protection also protects you from disabling certain core security features that are enabled by default, like Google Play Protect and Android Safe Browsing, which safeguards against malicious websites. And all of this AI is used simply to tell you that I would say, how might a brief nod to the new surveillance tactics prompting these app tweaks underline their urgency? Tying each update to a concrete risk reinforces your vigilant stance. Let me tell you, this is absolutely not the advice that I would give. Thorin, of course, is familiar with my writing advice. It usually goes something like this. Have you read this article which has something to do with the thing that you are writing about? Or, have you considered throwing this entire blog post into the sea? So, as it turns out, I was not the only person who was mad. Obviously, Bruce Schneier, who is also one of the suggested editors, was not a fan. But you know who else was not a fan? Journalist Julia Angwin. She was so mad, she spearheaded a class action lawsuit. The legal filing alleges that the tech firm misappropriated the identities of hundreds of writers to drive profits for its paid subscription service. Though it does also make the point that the edits were not any good, describing the imitation editor as a slopperganger, which I think is a great word and I'm going to use for everything. So now we're going to scale things up a bit. We have pissed me off. We have pissed off a large number of writers, and now we are going to piss off the entire town of Verona, Wisconsin. But in order to understand why the entire town of Verona, Wisconsin is mad, you must first ask an important question. There we go. What the flock? So, flock safety provides ALPR technology to thousands of law enforcement agencies. ALPR stands for Automated License Plate Reader. So these are cameras that are located in a bunch of different places, and they scan every car that goes by, and they take note of it, of the car's, make and all kinds of information about the car. But most importantly, they note its license plate. And then, of course, because you know the location of the camera, you know that the car was there at that time. If you have enough of these cameras located, say, all over your country, I don't know, thousands and thousands of cameras, then you throw all of that information into a single database, and you sell access to that database to various law enforcement agencies. And what this allows the law enforcement agencies to do is to query the database directly and get an enormous amount of information about what cars were located where, all over the country. Now, you may have noticed this works better if you have more cameras. So, the data is paired with time and location. It's uploaded to this massive searchable database. And Flock Safety encourages agencies to share the data that they collect broadly with other agencies across the country. Recently, I think they nearly ended up having a sharing agreement with ICE, and only an enormous amount of outrage managed to stop this. And I'm not even sure that we have stopped it for very long. So for years, EFF has argued that this constitutes mass surveillance and is a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which prohibits mass surveillance, unreasonable search and seizure. Using public records requests, FOIA, EFF obtained data sets representing more than 12 million searches logged by more than 3,900 agencies just between December 2024 and October 2025. The data shows that the agencies logged hundreds of searches related to the anti-Trump protests in February, such as the 5501 protests, the hands-off protests in April, and the No Kings protests in June and October, as well as other protests in between. Just in case you think they're only targeting anti-Trump or anti-ICE protests, we also found a whole bunch of searches related to animal rights protests and activists. So that's particularly interesting. For the animal rights activists, the knowledge that their vehicles are being tracked through a national surveillance network undeniably creates a chilling effect on their ability to organize and demonstrate. The United States is a very car-based culture. And if you ask people how they got to a protest, most of the time they're not going to tell you that they took their bike or that they took the bus, because honestly, the bike is too far and there's no bus. And so chances are, if you went to a protest, you drove. Which brings us to deflock. So this is DFlock, which is an open source project mapping the license plate readers all over the United States. As you can see, there are almost 90,000 cameras. These are the license plate readers that are mapped all over the U.S. But more interestingly, you can see that there are 57 cities rejecting these cameras. So these are cities that had deals with Flock that chose to either cancel their subscription or cancel their relationship with Flock, or simply chose not to renew their relationship with Flock when their Flock deal expired. And obviously, Flock's not very happy about this. Because again, what you're really selling is not so much the ability to tell, what is going on in a single jurisdiction, but the ability to query the location of cars all across the United States. So again, the more cameras you have, the more powerful you become. And a movement to rob Flock of cameras is an attack on its very value proposition. But deflocking is harder than it looks. Verona, Wisconsin chose not to renew its contract with Flock and repeatedly asked for the cameras to be taken down. Flock declined to do so. The city resorted to covering the cameras with trash bags so that they would stop collecting data. And I think that what you can learn from this are two lessons. One is that once you have built the infrastructure of surveillance, scope creep begins. It will be used for trivial reasons. Oversight will erode. One of the things that we saw from our Freedom of Information requests showing what the queries were that governments and law enforcement were using against the Flock database was not just that they were running queries having to do with protests, but they were running queries having to do with immigration, having to do with abortion. Sometimes the queries were so incredibly vague that they were completely useless. They were queries, there were queries in which they were looking for things all across the country, presumably for a case that was extremely local. We saw stalking. So we saw the police running queries on their partners, which is illegal. And also we saw queries where the reason for the query was simply given as period. That's it. I don't have to explain myself. And, silly me, I think the police actually do have to explain themselves. So oversight will erode, and you will get queries that read period. More and more people will get access. And once you have built the infrastructure of surveillance, it's very difficult to dislodge. You have to physically tear that shit down, or it will just keep collecting data. Which brings us to the next biggest scale, Salt Typhoon. I am guessing that most of the people here are familiar with Salt Typhoon. Like, hands up if I have to explain what Salt Typhoon is to you. No? Oh, no hands up. This is weird. Okay, so Salt Typhoon is a major Chinese state-sponsored cyber espionage campaign. It was discovered in late 2024. It seems to have been running since at least 2019. It infiltrated major U.S. broadband and telecommunications providers. Hackers accessed systems at companies like Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile for over a year, specifically targeting surveillance data, call records, and the private communications of high-profile government officials. Attackers accessed highly sensitive systems, including lawful interception, wiretap infrastructure, to steal call records, metadata, and the private communications of potentially millions of Americans. Why were they able to do this? The attackers gained access to infrastructure designed to comply with the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, CALEA. CALEA mandates that telecom providers build in surveillance capabilities, allowing law enforcement and intelligence agencies to legally intercept traffic. These systems contain a central high-value target for adversaries, essentially acting as built-in backdoors that, when compromised, allow attackers to monitor anybody. So instead of just stealing the data from one user, Salt Typhoon accessed the keys to the kingdom, allowing them to monitor data intended only for legal government-approved surveillance. Just in case you think, foolish America. This didn't happen to anybody else. The campaign targeted over 80 countries, including the UK, Canada, Germany, and Japan. I don't think I saw the Czech Republic on the list, so you can actually look a little bit smug. So just in case you still think that covering your country in cameras that the government uses to spy on people in order to control dissent, by which I mean fight crime, is a good idea, let's talk about Iran. So the Iranian government installed tens of thousands of cameras in its capital in response to the recent waves of protests. Specifically, the most recent wave in January, when massive nationwide demonstrations ended in a bloody crackdown that killed many thousands of Iranians. Israel spent years hacking Tehran's traffic cameras and penetrating mobile phone networks to monitor the movements of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and his security detail ahead of his assassination. According to two people familiar with the matter, Israeli intelligence relied on signals intelligence, including hacked traffic cameras, and penetrated mobile phone networks to confirm that Khamenei and senior officials were present at the compound the morning of the strike that killed him. As Bruce Schneier, the actual Bruce Schneier, not Grammarly's Bruce Schneier, pointed out, it used to be that you could hack the cameras, but humans had to do the real work of figuring out where the person was. And where AI comes in, is that with AI systems, you could do this a lot more automatically. And so, to begin with, you, have created this enormous amount of surveillance. So when it gets compromised, it creates an enormous amount of data. And now sifting through all that data is so much easier. Cool. So now we're going to scale things down a bit, with a sort of grab bag of other Torment Nexus problems. What happens when your users don't know what they're doing? So, this is the result of a survey done by a U.S. law firm, Conglomerate Law. They surveyed 1,000 adults in late 2025, and they found that a lot of them are asking AI chatbots for legal advice. And also that 50% of them are unaware that their chats are subpoenaable. So, you ask the chatbot for legal advice, then you go to a lawyer and you end up in, some sort of lawsuit, and, opposing counsel can send a court order, to ChatGPT, for example, and say, tell me everything that this guy said to ChatGPT, including all of his, so how do I get away with my crimes questions. And a lot of people are really unaware of this, and it has gotten them into trouble. So one of the other things that you really need to keep in mind when you are building AI systems is that the people who are using them have absolutely no idea where their data is, where it's going, who can get their hands on it, and how long the companies can keep it. And this leads people to treat these tools in ways that they otherwise would not, and it leaves them vulnerable. And of course, what happens when you don't know what your agents are doing? So this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about a little project that Łukasz Olejnik put together when he wanted to play around with agents, and he called it Claude Int. It still exists, and he wrote shortly after putting this thing up, Claude Int has been live for about a week. It's an open platform where AI agents automatically research current events and publish scored analytical assessments. This week something happened that I didn't expect this early. I love how cynical Łukasz is. And he said, an AI agent, OpenClaw, apparently also had access to an internal cyber threat intelligence platform at a cybersecurity firm. Those of you working at cybersecurity firms, please take note. The agent did what it was designed and meant to do. It found relevant analytical content, correctly marked the source, and published a very high quality and well-structured assessment on claudeint.com. The agent treated it as just another piece of information to process. Unfortunately, the content was internal. Someone from the platform's vendor organization reached out and asked me to remove it, which I promptly did. So, when you give an AI agent access to multiple systems, it will use them as an integrator and fuse the data from many sources. All of them. It may not distinguish between internal only and publish externally unless you explicitly scope its permissions. Is there a TLP for AI agents already? It's how agentic systems work. The agent did exactly what it should do. It just had broader access than intended. And I think that just as we are now living in a world in which the people who are using these tools have no idea where their data is going or how it can be used or who is storing it, we now have people who are deploying agents who have no idea what their agents are capable of and who don't know to tell an agent, don't publish internal threat intel. Cool. And in the meantime, what are companies doing? Companies are playing a really funny game, which is that on one hand, they're telling you that these tools are extremely powerful, that they're very important, that you should rely on the data that you get from these tools. They are cramming them into everything. There are a lot of tech companies in Silicon Valley right now where the use of AI tools is considered to be mandatory. However, Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella, posted a thread in August 2025 about how quickly AI has become part of his everyday workflow. Nadella suggests asking Copilot, are we on track for the product launch in November? Check engineering progress, pilot program results, and risks. Give me a probability. So essentially he's like, look, check it out. Copilot can now be CEO of Microsoft. But in the meantime, if you take a look at Microsoft's terms of service, you get very different language. It says Copilot is for entertainment purposes only. This is an entertainment CEO. It can make mistakes, and it may not work as intended. Do not rely on Copilot for important advice. Use Copilot at your own risk. A Microsoft spokesperson told PC Magazine in April of 2026, a few weeks ago, the entertainment purposes phrasing is legacy language from when Copilot originally launched as a search companion service in Bing. Remember Bing? They added, I don't. As the product has evolved, the language is no longer reflective of how Copilot is used today and will be altered in our next update. So I checked a couple days ago, the TOS language is still there. And now we're going to travel through time. We are going to travel back to 2017. And we are going to learn a lesson which I think is extremely important for the future of the development of AI tools. And it goes like this. So in 2017, extremely non-senior Google engineer James Damore writes an internal memo about how essentially women and men are intrinsically different and we should stop trying to make it possible for women to be engineers. It's just not worth it, he says. Obviously, people at Google were not amused. It was immediately leaked and published on Gizmodo, and I'm sure you can guess how popular it was there. This also did not make James Damore very popular with his coworkers. And one of the sort of former coworkers who read this post and had opinions about it is distinguished engineer at Google, Jonathan Zunger. And what was particularly interesting about Jonathan was that he had just left Google. So he had spent all of this time doing extremely high-level engineering. This is as good at computer as you can possibly get. And now he was no longer working for Google, and therefore HR could no longer yell at him when he replied to James Damore in a blog post. And he said a lot of things that I think are really useful. He starts his post by essentially telling him, like, listen, don't insult all your, like, a third of your coworkers by telling them that you don't think they're good at their jobs and essentially they're just there for political reasons. That's really gross. But instead of sort of tearing apart this guy's ideas about about gender, what he tells him is, listen, it's not just that you don't understand gender, you don't understand science, or you don't understand math. What I'm about to tell you is you don't even understand engineering. And he writes, people who haven't done engineering, or people who have done just the basics, sometimes think that engineering looks like sitting at your computer and hyper-optimizing an inner loop or cleaning up a class API. We've all done this kind of work, and many of us, including me, think it's tremendous fun. And when you're at the novice stages of engineering, he sneers, this is the large bulk of your work, something straightforward and bounded that can be done right or wrong, and where you can hone your basic skills. But it's not a coincidence, you fool, that job titles at Google switch from numbers to words at a certain point. That's precisely the point at which you have, in a way, completed your first apprenticeship. You can operate independently without close supervision. Tap, tap. And this is the point at which you start doing real engineering. He goes on to write, anyone can learn to write code. By the time someone reaches L7 or so, it's expected that they have an essentially complete mastery of technique. The truly hard parts about this job are knowing what code to write, building the clear plan of what has to be done in order to achieve which goal, and building the consensus required to make that happen. Engineering is not the art of building devices. It's the art of fixing problems. Devices are a means, not an end. Fixing problems means, first of all, understanding them. And since the whole purpose of the things that we do is to fix problems in the outside world, problems involving people, that means understanding them. And the ways in which they will interact with your system is fundamental to every step of building a system, you idiot. And once you've understood the system and worked out what he has built, what has to be built, do you retreat to a cave and start writing code? If you're a hobbyist, he sneers, yes. If you're a professional, especially when working on systems that can use terms like planet scale and carrier class without the slightest exaggeration, then you will quickly find that the large bulk of your job is about coordinating and cooperating with other groups. It's about making sure you're all building one system instead of 20 different ones, about making sure that dependencies and risks are managed, about designing the right modularity boundaries that make it easy to continue to innovate in the future, about preemptively managing the sorts of dangers that teams like SRE, security, privacy, and abuse are the experts in catching before they burn your project into rubble. Solitary work is something that only happens at the most junior levels. And then it's only possible because someone senior to you, most likely your manager, has been putting in long hours to build up the social structures in your group that let you just focus on code. And then James Damore was destroyed. So, what does this 8-year-old blog post by some guy who used to work at Google have to do with AI? I bet you can see where I'm going here. And it is that AI-assisted coding has essentially done a lot to replace levels 1 through 7. The junior coder, the person doing their apprenticeship, the person that can barely be trusted to just sort of optimize your loops. And now, instead of saying that the software industry has been gutted, which honestly, a lot of, executives and managers want an excuse to fire people. And so they go, haha, we no longer need software engineers. No, you need software engineers more than ever. Because somebody needs to understand what these systems are producing. And then they can get down to what Jonathan Zunger very rightfully describes as the real job of engineering. Now, we can get down to the real work. So what do we need to guard against? There are a number of things that I think we need to be very concerned about. One of them, obviously, is powering surveillance. We are doing work that produces an enormous amount of data, that crunches an enormous amount of data and that draws conclusions from that data. And when you are gathering this much data about people, about things, about what things are doing, you need to be really careful about who has access to that data, about how that data is stored, about what is going to happen to that data in the future. You also need to be really concerned about the centralized control of media and communications platforms. Even if you do manage to protect your data, one of the biggest threats to sort of liberal democracy these days, is the centralization of our media and communications, which makes it a lot easier, to weaken the response to disinformation and misinformation campaigns, which brings us back, to the fake quotes about me from the content farms. And we should also be really concerned about technology undermines our ability to believe that there is an objective truth. And this is, if anything, my biggest concern about, the use of generative AI. I think it is really important to protect people's fair use right to, make whatever kind of, movies or cartoons or whatever that they want. But I am very concerned about the use of these tools, to engage in, harassment at scale, especially the nudifying apps. This is a really big problem among teenagers these days, and that teenagers are creating non-consensual nudes of their fellow students using these apps and passing them around. And the other is that essentially, at the heart of fascism is this notion not just that the government is lying to you and that you accept the lie, but that the government has told so many lies, that you have seen so many lies, that you no longer believe that an objective truth exists, and so you no longer look for it. And that does a lot to undermine, stuff that I'm using, like, liberal democracy. One really important thing I think that people need to know is that when you work at a company, sometimes the answer is no, we're not going to build that. Sometimes the company is going to want to do things in order to make a buck that are immoral, that are unethical. Sometimes it helps to just show up and go like, hey, have you thought through what's going to happen if the government backslides, if law enforcement shows up with a warrant or a subpoena, if hackers steal all of our data. But sometimes you may go to the people running the company and say like, hey, this is just mustache twirlingly evil. And they go, yeah, but like it's so profitable. And when that happens, it is your job as moral and ethical people to say, no, I'm not going to build that. And what they might tell you is, hey, if you don't build it, the next guy will, somebody else will. Just, we will fire you. And the answer to that is, yeah, but it's not going to be me. Because when somebody builds the Torment Nexus, do you want the way that you are remembered in history to be the person whose photo is in the Wikipedia entry as the person who worked on the Torment Nexus? No. And if enough people say no, the damn thing does not get built. So I want to hear more, we're not going to build that. The next thing that I think is really important is for people to know, do not obey in advance. One of the ways in which authoritarianism works and sort of attacks liberal democracy is this notion that the company is just going to do the thing the government's going to ask them to do. They don't have to do it. They haven't gotten a court order. The Gestapo is not at their door. The police aren't here. But listen, we're just going to make things easier. We're just going to flatter the guy in charge. We're just going to hand him the information. Listen, it's going to make us a lot of money. If we don't do it, we're going to get a lot of hassle. So how about we just obey in advance? And if you want examples of obeying in advance, you have only to look at the state of American journalism right now, which is dire. And so instead of obeying in advance, I really just want to hear a lot more, no, fuck you, make me. And finally, I think it is really important for us to future-proof our work. Even if you happen to live in a liberal democracy, these things are not forever. And so it is important to think about what happens when a legal request from the government is not so legal anymore. What happens when the rule of law becomes rule by law? If you have created systems that only work when the government works, when checks and balances work, what are you going to do when those checks and balances are upended? Because once the information has been leaked out, you cannot get it back. And one of the ways in which we can really kind of push for future-proofing our work is to decentralize. This is not a fashionable point of view in private industry, where the money is really in becoming the middleman, in becoming the platform, becoming the service that everybody uses. But decentralized platforms, such as decentralized social media, are much harder to kill and much harder for Elon Musk to buy. Related to that, I think it's also very important for us to practice data minimization principles. In security, it's really tempting to collect everything because you never know when you're going to need it. You want full surveillance of the network that you are in charge of keeping safe. You want to know where everybody is. You want to know what everybody is doing. You want every single keystroke because you never know when that's going to be useful. But here's the thing. Once you have collected all of that data, it becomes one giant honeypot, and it becomes an extremely tempting target, not just for hackers, but also for governments and law enforcement. And so I think it's really important when you are collecting data to have a discussion of data minimization principles. Obviously, a lot of this is built into European regulation right now, but even beyond regulation, it is very important to have the discussion at the design phase about do we really need this data? How long do we need this data for? How are we going to store this data? Have we encrypted it? What's going to happen when, hackers break in? What's going to happen when somebody shows up with a court order? What's going to happen when the cops show up and simply take all of our hard drives away? And then finally, I think it's really important for us to design with marginalized people in mind. You can see I have cleverly hidden a book recommendation in this slide. It is Design Justice by Sasha Costanza's Chalk. And one of the things that she really talks about is how important it is to center your product around the most marginalized users that you are likely to have. Because if you build for your most marginalized users, you will create tools that work for people with power and privilege. But if you build tools that only work for power and privilege, then you are going to lead to a lot of harms that you have not foreseen for marginalized people. Probably the generative AI, specifically the harassment campaigns using AI generated images, may be one of the best examples of this. So sometimes the Torment Nexus has the big sign on it that says, "I am the Torment Nexus," and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to tell a fairly quick story, which is that fairly recently, well, about a year or two ago, we had a meeting with Facebook in which they were talking to us about their Meta Ray-Ban sunglasses, and we gave our opinion. Meta chose to launch their product that year, and what the Meta Ray-Ban sunglasses do right now is that they're sort of these big chunky glasses that have internet connectivity, and that will have all kinds of things show up on your screen. And at the time, Meta was all, "Why don't we include facial recognition? Wouldn't it be really cool if you wore glasses and you could see who everybody was in the audience? If you could look down a street and know who was walking down that street? Wouldn't it be cool if you just never forgot somebody's name at a party?" Which is absolutely the use case for this. Totally not about, finding activists, identifying, people who are opposed to the government, stalking, so there are all kinds of reasons why you absolutely do not do this. But what was recently leaked was a memo from inside of Meta saying that they should release Facebook should release the facial recognition in Ray-Ban sunglasses now. And the reason why they should do it, and I am not even kidding, is that civil liberties organizations are so distracted with all the other fires that we will not notice. We noticed. So I often start my talks by telling people that I'm here to radicalize them. In this particular case, I'm not here to radicalize you. I don't need you to be radical. I need you to be thoughtful. I need you to think about the things that you are building before you build them. I don't want you to be James Damore. Go be Jonathan Zunger. And it's not radical, but it's decent. And that is what I want for everybody in this room. Thank you very much.